Well, thank you for being here today. I'm Heather Gatney, and I'm the coordinator of the CVFS webinar series. Our host today is Bill Axon, research professor at the Population Studies Center at ISR. Bill is going to describe new CVFS data on the transition to adulthood and next steps for the project. There will be a Q&A session after the presentation. We ask that you remain muted until then. During the Q&A, you may unmute and ask your question, or you can submit a question at any time today using the chat feature. We'd also like to remind you that this webinar is being recorded. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this point. A recording of this webinar and the slides will soon be available on the CVFS website. Okay, Bill.
Thanks so much, Heather. My name is on this first slide. I am responsible for all errors and omissions, but I want to show great gratitude to Heather for all of her work on this, Stephanie Chardul for her work on this, and my last three slides go through a dozen other people who have contributed a lot of work to what I'm about to show you. I'll also comment, I'm very excited about these new data, excited to tell you about them. I am going to try and keep myself under control because, as you might expect, I have way too many slides and need to keep going. Our presentation today, let me get some stuff slid around over here. Hold on a sec. Whoa, that's not what I meant to do. Our presentation today focuses on these new data, and I'm going to cover 5 topics: the scientific objectives of this new transition to adulthood study, the study design, the baseline data collection, a few of our findings from the baseline, and the next steps in this study. The scientific objectives of the new transition to adulthood study actually have 3 parts. I'm going to start with the overall project objectives. Then I'll focus on the transition to adulthood panel study objectives. And finally, I want to talk about the methods and operations objectives quickly. Our overall project objectives are the investigation of intergenerational influences on family formation processes. And by family formation processes, we mean specifically sex, contraception, marriage, and childbearing. And I want to comment that the Chitwan Valley Family Study has really become an ideal tool for intergenerational studies, mainly because we have a full family design and we've been following these families for more than 25 years. So we now have tools for excellent quality intergenerational work. The focus of the project is actually on the role of parental mental health in intergenerational influences on family formation. And that's enabled by these new measures of mental disorder diagnostic interviews that we've talked about earlier in the webinar series. But because they include both the mothers and the fathers, they're really a wonderful resource for intergenerational work on the impact of parental mental health on children's family formation processes. Finally, as you've heard Coulter describe before, we also have new measures of genetic risk factors. We've now genotyped more than 10,000 members of CVFS, including the mothers, fathers, and young adults in this study, which only improve the quality of our ability to study intergenerational influences on family formation. This portion of the overall study, which is new data collection on the transition to adulthood, had the objective of providing young adults ages 15 to 25 with a private, confidential, highly secure way to report their experiences with relationship dynamics, sex, contraceptive use, and substance use. We also wanted to create measures to assess events that change rapidly and correctly capture the time order of those events as they unfold. And we want to follow these young adults wherever they go to repeat these measures and continue this time-ordered measurement. And of course, many of these young adults will leave their parental home and travel away for school, work, marriage, or all kinds of other stuff. Our methods and operations objectives are, as they have been with so much of the CVFS, to use the same research tools for Nepal that are used in the United States right now. In the case of of a survey of transition to adulthood on these kind of topics that includes multi-mode data collection, primarily with a web survey, with an interviewer administered phone option for respondents who cannot complete the web survey. Multi-mode reminders to participate. Those turn out to be quite effective in improving survey response rates for web surveys. And here we used mail, email, text messages, and phone calls to achieve multi-mode reminders. We also have a new mobile-friendly web-based monthly sex and contraceptive history calendar. And it's concurrently in the field with the American Family Health Survey. So literally the exact same tool we're using in both the United States and Nepal at the same time. We have a Blaze 5 questionnaire with custom sample management tools to ensure high quality data and management of the process of moving the data across modes. Finally, we have high security data servers at Michigan that immediately encrypt all responses. Very valuable for work in the United States on such topics, but even more valuable for work in other countries. I threw a couple of references in here in case you wanted to read a bit more about some of the work ongoing on these tools. The first one is about the web-based event history calendar for measuring contraceptive use. And the second one's about using multi-mode for web surveys, especially multi-mode reminders and how that can be used to improve web survey response rates. Okay, next topic is the study design overview. I'll talk briefly about the sample recruitment, a little bit longer about human subjects protections, and I'll talk about the contact protocol. And finally, I'll describe the instrument design to you. The sample recruitment focuses on everyone aged 15 to 25 as of April 2021, as reported in the household registry for the updated CVFS sample. And I say updated because the CVFS sample was refreshed in 2016. It features parental consent and age verification for those aged 15 to 17. Respondent birth date verification for all respondents. This is because there's known age heaping issues in the household registry age records. It's come up before in some of our webinars. And we want to make sure that age is verified. So we only have those ages 15 to 25 in the study, not those younger or older. And finally, we have age appropriate informed consent. So the human subject protections include sort of recruitment of subjects, informed consent, assent, privacy screener, and the encryption of responses. As you might guess, this thing is reviewed and regulated by both the University of Michigan IRB and the Nepal Health Research Council. And the recruitment plan varies a little bit between minors and adults. For minors, the parent or guardian of a subject aged 15 to 17 years was contacted by phone before contacting the minor subjects. Staff members explain the study to the parent, obtain permission for the child's participation in the study, and that includes a waiver of documentation parental consent, so they can provide it over the telephone. I think this data collection took place entirely during COVID in Nepal. For all respondents, they're invited to participate via an email invitation, or if they don't have an email, by an advanced letter to the respondent's home. No in-person recruitment, and I'll describe a little bit more about that advanced letter in a moment. Invitations to recruit all subjects 15 to 25 years contained a brief description of the study and a unique link in that invitation letter to the baseline web survey, unique to that respondent. The comprehensive written consent or assent was obtained prior to starting the survey, once they followed that unique link and logged into the survey. For telephone surveys, interviewers read the entire consent assent form to the respondent and addressed any respondent questions. The baseline interview began after consent assent was obtained from the respondent, and waiver of documentation was obtained as well because of the remote nature of this data collection. As I mentioned, a key objective was to make sure that respondents had complete privacy and confidentiality in responding to this survey. When the interview starts, either on the web or by the phone, respondents are asked if they have privacy to answer the survey questions. If they don't and are unable to find it, we break off and start again. If they're not able to find it and start again, then we start the phone contact process. Once they start the interview, the first thing they get is this age check. And that's used, as I say, to sort of verify that we have the right ages in our study. So the web surveys were actually administered directly from the University of Michigan Survey Research Center secure servers. This has the advantage of each answer is encrypted on the server immediately as it's entered. Telephone interviewers in Nepal also access the survey questionnaire, mainly on the same secure servers, to enter respondents' answers. As soon as each answer is encrypted, the response is entered, the responses are encrypted. So there's really no way for a third party, including parents, to see the kids' answers to these questions. This approach is highly secure and ensures confidentiality for the respondents and helps respondents know that they're got high confidentiality. Okay, the contact protocol is a little complicated. We emailed an initial invitation to every respondent who had a valid email address. I'll talk about how many of those we have in a minute. The body of the email contained a unique link to the survey. If a respondent did not have an email address, we delivered a paper invitation with a unique survey link embedded in a QR code so they could follow that link to get to the survey. After that, each respondent received up to 2 more email reminders, 3 text reminders, and 2 phone call reminders to participate via the web. As I mentioned, our research on web survey response rates and compliance is that contact reminders via alternative modes greatly improve participation in web surveys and help you achieve higher response rates more representative of the general population. At a defined point in time, all respondents who had not yet completed the web survey were transitioned to the telephone interview protocol. So it kind of stopped and then everybody transitioned. The instrument design is drawn from 5 other prior studies in these domains, many of which you already know about. Chitwan Valley Family Study, of course, we drew on the individual interviews, particularly the 1996 and 2008 questionnaires. The American Family Health Study that I just described is a national web survey in the United States. It's modeled on the National Survey of Family Growth, but it's done all by web. So the content already transitioned to a web-based design. Family Migration and Real Life Outcomes, or FMELO, asked a bunch of very interesting questions about young adult entrance into romantic relationships, and we replicated some of those. WHO's World Mental Health Survey International College Student Study focused on a bunch of web-based measures of substance use and abuse that we work to replicate. And finally, the Relationship Dynamics and Social Life Study that many of you know includes a lot of content on sort of monthly change or weekly changes, but rapid changes in sex, contraception, and pregnancy, and we worked with a bunch of those measures as well. Okay. Now I'm going to move on to the baseline survey data collection. Our baseline survey launched in September of 2021 and was completed in January of 2022. It's only February of 2022. It's quite fresh. The mode was a self-completed web survey with multi-mode reminders in its first phase. And if the web survey is not completed by 10 weeks, ISERN interviewers attempted a telephone survey. Questionnaire content covered topics of education and work to start out, relationship history, including marriage, a sex, contraceptive, and pregnancy history calendar, substance use, and desire for more children. I'm going to show you some outline of that content, including some screenshots of the instrument. Probably none of you are surprised that if you've ever been in a relationship, we start to ask the start date, if sex occurred, the date of the first sex, the length of the relationship, if it included marriage and the date of the marriage. If no, we ask some follow-up questions about contact with potential partners and holding hands or hugging potential partners. For the sex history, we ask if they've ever had sex with someone and then someone else. And this history includes some content now common in US surveys of these topics about whether or not forced intercourse occurred. Of course, forced sex and forced intercourse have very low rates of effective contraceptive use. So the marriage history starts out with ever married to anyone, and then the dates. The sex history calendar focuses in on the past 24 months, and in which months, if any, sexual intercourse happened. Now, it looks like this in English, and I'll give you a second. This design looks this way so that if you're doing this on a smartphone, you can easily scroll through the options with your thumb and check those which apply. In Nepalese, it looks like this, not to shock any of you. And what happens is the respondent can, with a touch screen, just press on them, or can click on these to check the boxes where sexual intercourse occurred. Then there's contraceptive history calendar layered on top of that, which I'll show you more of in a second. And you can see the question we use to get it started, and then all the different methods that they can, include as contraceptives that they used. And I'll show you, and then the calendar part goes through, if for that method, which months, if any, were you or your partner using that method. And just like the other calendar, they can press it or click it and turn it to another color. And in this case, you can get, I think, Heather, I should be more careful and slow down a little bit. It lights up with the sex active months already in it. And then these check marks reflect the months where contraception, or the respondents checking that they also used a contraception. So you can get this combination of they used contraception in months that they were sexually active and months that they were not sexually active, both. And now we'll go on to the layer of pregnancy, where we're looking at the same 24 months on the same screen, and in which months, if any, were you or your partner pregnant. Again, the months of intercourse will display, and they can check, other months that they were pregnant. Okay, so that's the sex and contraceptive use history calendar, some screenshots to give you a little bit of a sense. If you would like to read more about it, I put that reference earlier. Heather and our co-authors and I have a paper in Field Methods where you can look at that instrument in more detail. After that content, this instrument moves on to substance use content. It asks about alcohol use first, and it asks any use. Then it asks use in the past 12 months, and then it asks these questions about whether you felt the need to cut down, anyone ever criticized you, or whether you ever annoyed or criticized by people, and ever felt the need to drink first thing in the morning. These are items used to help diagnose substance use disorders. And the same sequence is then used for consumption of cannabis, opium and morphine, and other substances to get us a kind of total substance use picture. The end of the survey goes into one of, as you know, my favorite measures of your childbearing plans and intentions, the scale created by Lola Jean Coombs to measure how many children you would want to have. And after that scale is completed, we ask 4, contact information update, primary phone number, secondary phone number, permission to text, and the email address. Okay, that's the protocol for the baseline survey. I'll show you that we got answers to a bunch of those last questions, which help us to frame a follow-up survey with a better chance of using email addresses, text messages, and so forth. So at the beginning of the contact protocol, at the beginning of the baseline survey data collection, we had 3,456 total sample lines. 38% of those had an email address, which is lower than we had hoped. 59% had a phone number, 35% had both. And we sent 2,142 hard copy invitation letters to respondents without email addresses. And so it brings us to stumbling block number 1, that not shocking, but in Chitwan, in Nepal, our 15 to 25-year-old target respondents don't have a lot of email addresses. That makes lack of email addresses a significant barrier to success with a web survey. And this essentially required a much larger amount of interviewer effort on contact attempts and eventually on telephone interviews. On the plus side, from the 3,404 age eligible young adults, we got 2,999 responses that were at least partially complete. Well, actually, I have 2,000, I'm gonna get this wrong, Heather, 2,985 that are complete. So the difference between completes and partials is not very big. But this is a response rate of 88.1% on the baseline survey. Of those 2,999 respondents, 58% completed the survey by the web by themselves, and 42% completed the survey on a phone call with an interviewer. The mean survey length was 14.5 minutes. And of course, one of our core goals was to keep the baseline survey, which we consider the longest of them, to be as short as possible so that respondents were encouraged that the burden would be low when we asked them to participate in follow-up interviews. We feel really good about keeping the mean survey length under 15 minutes. A little bit of data for you. As I said, this is very fresh, just completed in January. It's only February, but we know out of the 2,985 fully completed interviews, about 21% are 15 to 17, 37% 22 to 25, leading us to 42% 18 to 21. Educational attainment, you know, it's truncated both because a bunch of these respondents are 15 to 17 years old, so can't have gone much past 10th grade, and because educational attainment in Nepal in general is low. But you can see the distribution we have there. You can also see that just under 40% of these young people are reporting that they've ever been employed for pay. Also super interesting, 38% report they've ever been in a relationship, 26% report they've ever had sex, 23% currently in a relationship, 15% currently in a sexual relationship, and 22% any sex in the last 24 months. I was really happy with this original set of statistics because we know that we're trying to catch especially the 15, 16, 17-year-olds before they begin these transitions, so we can watch them through the process of making these transitions. And I feel pretty comfortable that for a large share of our respondents, you know, Nepal remains a sort of universal marriage society where it's pretty common for everybody to get married and have sex. So we caught this at the beginning. And we also have, I think, really exciting data over what's happened to these folks in the last 24 months. 24% reported they had ever used alcohol. 20% reported alcohol use in the last 12 months. And then you'll see on these need to cut down type of questions, we do get some folks endorsing those. Heather, I think I cut the cannabis, opium and other sort of substance use is less than 1%. Cannabis was under 5%. It's a young sample right at the beginning. We'll see what happens as we continue to watch them. But it is nice to have those measures for the group who do more than one substance so that we can keep track of those who are most exposed to the risk of reaching substance use disorder. Okay, I'm doing better than I thought I would at the time. Next steps in this transition to adulthood study. I'm going to talk about 4 things here. I'm going to talk first about launching the panel study re-interviews. That's the next step in the panel study that we just described to you. Then I'll talk to you about linking these new transition to adulthood data back to family and community data in the CVFS. I'll talk about public use data dissemination. We'll move very quickly on the baseline and as quickly as we can on the subsequent pieces. And finally, I'll wrap up by telling you about our newest upcoming transition to adulthood data collection, which will be focused on hair-based cortisol. So the first follow-up survey will launch in March, next month. It will be a self-completed web survey with multi-mode reminders in the first phase. And then if the web survey is not completed by day 30 of that phase, of that launch, ISER interviewers will attempt a phone survey after that. And I wanted to show you this interesting thing about our improved contact information for follow-up that's a direct product of that last piece of the baseline questionnaire. So we have 2,986 total sample lines that will be eligible for the first follow-up interview. Of them, 48% have an email address, up from 38% in the baseline. 90% have a phone number, up from 59% in the baseline. 46% have both, up from 35% in the baseline. And so we anticipate 1,552 hard copy invitation letters will be delivered to respondents without email addresses. So as expected, respondents who completed the baseline have more complete contact information, but we got 88% of our original sample in the baseline. So what we're also seeing is we're able to improve rates by explicitly asking respondents to update the information at the end of the survey and allowing interviewers to update information in the sample management system when they did a telephone survey. And this gives us great hope that we will continue to be able to deliver high response rates in the follow-up surveys and hopefully continue to be able to gather updated contact information at each round of follow-up survey. The panel study re-interview content will be similar to what you saw in the baseline. It'll cover the same domains. The key differences are the sex and contraceptive history calendar will be automated to start whenever the last interview occurred. And so as you might guess, for each respondent, that might be a different duration. It will never be 24 months the way the baseline calendar was, but we'll try and make that a continuous, seamless record. Our questions about forced sex, marriage, substance use will all be timed to now since the last interview. We won't ask about lifetime again. And then we're planning to have a rotating set of attitude questions to finish off the interview. So we won't ask the Coombs scale every time we do a follow-up. We will ask some attitudes about marriage, premarital sex, and divorce, along with the Coombs scale in a rotating pattern. And as I mentioned, we'll update our contact information every chance we get. Data linking, and in addition to appreciating Emily Treeleven's webinar on data linking and she couldn't join us today. I want to make sure to appreciate, Sarah, your effort to talk about data linking with regard to the women's work history calendars you presented. It's a big part of the value added for each new data collection in the CVFS. In this case, we're going to link the young adult respondents first to their prior individual interviews. For people this young, those prior individual interviews are the mental health interviews that were conducted in 2016 to 18. The age range on that was youngest was age 15 in 2016-18, so it'll only be part of the total respondents in this pool. We'll connect them to the community context histories, and of course that will apply to everybody because they had to at one time or another live in a CVFS neighborhood to be eligible for this interview. We'll link them back to the household characteristics, including characteristics drawn from the household registry system, and then the most recent household level interviews about the household economy, consumption, production, etc. And last but not least, we're going to link them to mothers and fathers' individual interviews and life histories. The current project from which this is one piece focuses on parental mental health, as I mentioned at the beginning. So one of the high priorities for this project is to link the parental mental health histories to these measures of baseline stuff about sex, contraception, pregnancy, and substance use. Our analyses with the linked data will prioritize mothers and fathers' experiences of mental disorders, predicting their children's transition to adulthood. Those priorities will be transitions into sexual relationships, contraceptive use, substance use, and primarily those because this new web survey data is our only source of that data currently. And as we make progress on that, we'll also begin integrating our new polygenic risk scores for major depressive disorder, alcohol use disorder, and post-traumatic stress disorder into these intergenerational models. What's going to be great about the polygenic risk scores is that we'll have them available for the mothers and the fathers, all the mothers and fathers for whom we have these mental health measures, and many of the children in our transition to adulthood study. Public use data dissemination, we will work, and by we, I think I mean Heather, myself, and anybody else we can find, will work as hard as we can to get these baseline survey data released through ICPSR and available to all of you to use. We expect that work to begin immediately. We're putting together the documentation for that. It's never as fast a process as any of us would like, but that work is beginning right away. The follow-up survey data releases, as follow-up surveys are completed, data releases will occur as soon as the data are available. My hope here, and I guess Heather and I probably both share this hope, is that once we're able to create one set of data documentation tools for that process of archiving and ICPSR, the process itself will become quicker, easier, and more straightforward to implement with each round of new follow-up data. The parent-child linked data we also plan to release. We plan to release, actually, first we'll plan to release a linked data file for mothers, fathers, and children's marriage timing, mothers, fathers, mental health, and children's marriage timing, then first birth timing, and then the measures in this new study as we can get each one of those set up. And finally, last but not least, hair-based cortisol. So cortisol is known to be a marker for stress. My first work on cortisol was with Heather and the RDSL team, getting saliva-based cortisol measures from RDSL members. And one issue with saliva-based cortisol is that it's a very temporary measure of level of stress. whereas hair holds a longer term, approximately 3-month measure biomarker for stress. And that makes it a really wonderful biomarker for stress. We know stress is an important part of decision-making in the transition to adulthood. We also know there's been a lot of events going on in Nepal likely to produce stress. We're well past the armed conflict now. We had the big earthquake in 2015, pandemic era deaths and disruptions producing stress. And I have a few teenagers, some of you do too. Turns out stress and teenage transition to adulthood stuff go hand in hand. And so we think that the transition to adulthood is a particularly important time to get a biomarker for stress, and particularly if you want to understand the connections between parental family, including parental mental disorders, kids' experiences of the transition to adulthood, and how stress may play a role in connecting those. We're in the process of launching a large-scale hair collection among the same young adults in this web survey. The field work for that hair collection is planned to launch later this year in 2022. One reason Durga's on a plane right now on his way to Nepal is to start the pilot testing of our protocol for that. If that goes according to plan, we should be in lab analyses of the cortisol by 2023, and data linking back to this panel planned in 2023. And I'm happy to discuss this in our Q&A time. Before we go to Q&A time though, as I mentioned, I got a lot of people here to thank. The project has 3 big parts: analyses of existing CVFS data, use of these new polygenic risk scores to predict intergenerational influences, and also this new web survey I've told you about. We have a large team, and Kate Scott is a psychologist at the University of Otago in New Zealand. She's my MPI on this project, and it's a team that's been working very, very hard. Kate and I worked for well over 4 years, I think, to get the resources to do this project. To make this web survey possible, running off servers at Michigan using Blaze 5 and our state-of-the-art management software, being able to manage a mixed mode data collection design with a multi-mode reminder design in a field operation in Nepal required some of the best minds today in the operationalizing of these kind of automated data collection tools. This is the core team that did that work, and they have my gratitude, but I want to make sure you know who they are as well. And of course, it took a whole bunch of people in Nepal to make this happen. The ISERN fieldwork team. You might think that a web survey run off servers in the United States wouldn't require much fieldwork. But as I described to you in this case, this web survey and the telephone survey that went with it were successful because of all the work this team did to stay in constant contact with these respondents and make sure they had what they needed to be consented to do it in the first place, and then follow up them to get it done in the second place. Okay, that's my story. Heather, thank you for finding us a lovely picture of mountains. I am happy to open to discussion.
I have a question. Given that with this questionnaire, you went, okay, doing a web survey, it means that the respondents have to have access to the internet, right? And presumably that comes at some cost to them. So I was just wondering if there was either push from IRBs at Michigan or something like that, or if you just thought about doing this on your own in terms of offering incentives to respondents because they have these web costs associated with it.
Yeah, No, let's do both the short answer and the long answer, because I think both are relevant to everyone engaged in CVFS or any other international work. The short answer is we did not pay incentives on this study. The long answer starts with, we never have in the Chitwan Valley Family Study or in Nepal. And when we started out, I was quite clear that paying an incentive would be coercive in that setting. As time has passed, I keep waiting for us to get to the place where, okay, obviously we're going to change that now. And you're right, everybody asked that question. It's not just you, it's not just me. IRB asked that question. And IRB is interesting, right? I think the US IRBs, on the one hand, expect an incentive. On the other hand, they're, in my experience, grown very attentive to the fact that incentives could become coercive. And therefore, you have to be careful if you're really giving people freedom of choice about the coercion. Our non-response was low. I don't know, Heather, when I looked at some more details that I didn't put in this presentation, I was happy to see item missing data for the first time. Some people actually skipped questions they didn't want to answer. We didn't used to have that in Nepal at all. I felt like, okay, that's a good sign. People get it. They don't have to answer a question just because we asked it. And we're making progress in terms of the respondents' own assertiveness about their level of comfort with the study or not with the study. I will tell you that partly the decision on this design was based on a study that Dirga led, that I worked on some, and an education specialist here named Brian Rowan worked on with us, that was an intensive study of the 8th grade. And some of you may know a bunch about that data collection. I think that's super exciting data also. It wasn't CVFS data in the sense that it wasn't any effort to link to respondents, but it was all schools that are in the CVFS data set. It was only schools that offered 8th grade. And it was, get test scores for 8th graders at the beginning, measure a bunch of stuff during the year, and then get test scores at the end. And so we have a ton of data on 8th grade students, 8th grade teachers, 8th grade parents coming out of that study. And Dirga's report is like, everybody has access to the internet. Why are we talking about this? And so, I think, the costs of text messaging, phone calls, et cetera, they're not zero. I think for a lot of human beings, they might not be negligible. I think your point is quite reasonable, and I agree with it. So far, we haven't made that transition. I keep thinking it will happen. But participation rates were very, very high in spite of not doing that. And
Yeah.
I might be old school here, but I continue to believe respondents in this part of Nepal don't have very many opportunities to tell their story, and these young people don't get a lot of voice, and so maybe this was an important opportunity. I'm not in a position to judge that. I'm only able to report that prior field experience just before this said don't do that, and we didn't do it.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, it seems like it's got to change.
But maybe it doesn't in this sense, right? I mean, you can imagine the way digital access is going to roll out in parts of Nepal is going to be different than how it rolled out in the US. And so we may quickly get to a point where it's not, just a thing of the elite and really expensive and prohibitively costly for people. So
yeah, I think that's possible. I think that's actually possible.
Super interesting.
Actually, a side note on that, my understanding is that what we expect to be a problem is very high turnover in telephone numbers compared to a place like the United States, in part because our don't want to say anecdotal, I think it's more appropriate to say sort of ethnographic reports from young people, is that they're taking advantage of whatever deals being offered by whatever carriers offering them and changing up SIM cards constantly. And so if that really is true at the population scale, when we get into this, we will, of course, be thrilled we have phone numbers, but a whole bunch of them won't work. So we're about to find that out in March, I guess.
So actually, I was going to piggyback on that exact comment because first of all, it was really amazing and really fun to look at. What kind of struck me, two things. Remind me to get back to the hair court.
Yeah.
But the first one is how similar a lot of. So we had a multi-mode study, COVID study for fragile families. So it actually very similar sort of situation in a lot of ways. And I was just kind of curious about two things. One, what we ended up finding is that, email addresses were okay, sending letters were okay, but the primary way through which we contacted and got them interested was through texting. And I was curious if that was the same, like it was not even close, actually. It was like the dominant thing.
Yeah, and honestly, so right, so important note, there was no randomization of method in this study.
Yeah.
There's a replicate design, and the replicate had phases to it, and we do know how and the reminders were time ordered by method, not just by numbers. So we can see, if there were increases right after texts that look different than increases right after emails or phone calls.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be excited to look at those data. I know Brady was involved a little bit in the design, is kind of waiting to get more involved, Brady West, more involved until we get some of those kind of data. Heather heard me losing patience yesterday because I still don't have the side-by-side run of how these responses change, whether it's done on the web or done on the telephone, which of course was sort of step one for me before I got to the reminders.
Yeah.
Coulter, great news is we do have all that measured. All the process data is captured in a survey track tool. That means we've got time varying variables that we can put into models and test for. It won't have randomization to it, but we can at least take an observational look at whether the evidence suggests that or not. Sarah, great to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, no, it's great. I mean, it's just interesting how similar it sounds to what happened in our study, which was just actually oddly around the same time.
Well, I mean, I'll stick with that before we go to the hair for a second, Coulter,
Yeah.
because Brady, Mick Cooper, James Wagner, and I are running the American Family Health Survey, which is a nationally representative replication of NSFG, but area probability web. It's not clustered. It's a tremendously more efficient design than most face-to-face designs because it's not area clustered. In fact, it's better than that. It's stratified, but not clustered. So it's a wonderfully efficient design. Response rates are nothing like Nepal, of course, but the performance against different types of reminders is, I think, to Sarah's point about paying respondents, to get success out of the web survey in the United States, not only do we pay incentives, but in the envelope that arrives at your house to invite you to do the survey, we're now sending envelopes with a little window so that you can see the $2 bill or the $5 bill through the little window and actually open the envelope up. That's the United States. Obviously, that's a big difference, but otherwise, it is very, very impressive how similar the two things work.
Yeah, no, it's impressive. I want to make sure Elise has time. Let me just ask, when we collected hair cortisol in the Fragile Family Study, actually the same one, a few years ago, one of the things we ended up finding was how important a survey of hair treatment was. And
yeah,
that was not something we knew until
involves that. Yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, Heather, if you wish to speak to it, I consider Heather our expert on the protocol, but it does involve that kind of survey.
Right. We're working on drafting a sort of a questionnaire. When you say hair treatments, I assume you mean color treatments and
Color treatments or straightening, or, I mean, there's different perms, anything like that. And yeah. And then the other thing, well, and then some people, yeah, there's all sorts of different treatments that are out there. And then of course there's selection, and that the people who do the most work are also the most likely to not want to give their hair to
right,
you.
right.
So collecting that even on the people who don't actually provide you the data is helpful in determining how that selection process happens.
Right, and we're considering doing that for reasons for refusals.
Yeah,
yeah. And my understanding too is that that's not necessarily eligibility criteria. We would still collect the sample from someone who has processed hair, but we just want to collect that information.
You want to collect it in part because it's like a nice covariate, because some of them don't play well with the cortisol assay.
Okay.
Yeah. Let me ask a quick follow-up on that one, Coulter, which is, how often did you guys have the problem that the respondent did not have enough hair? We're concerned about that in Nepal because of the use of hair cutting as part of religious ceremonies.
So ours is problematic for that exact reason. So most of our sample are African American, male, female, and so the hairstyles can be particularly short for the men. And they would still were happy to give us whatever we could get, but to your point about the 3 months, the 3 months is just based on the length that's closest to the scalp, right? You can actually go quite a bit longer if they have longer hair. It's just that 3 is like a reasonable amount of time that people could probably give. And for some of the young men, it was, probably only 2 months worth. And so we had to note that it was shorter.
Yeah, and for us, this is going to intersect. The ISER and the staff is so great, and they always want to deliver 100% response rates on everything. So I know very well that the first reaction of the field team to these respondents turn back their stuff because they don't have enough hair is going to be, so how many months do we have to wait before we go again and try? And I think that's going to be an issue. Elise, Coulter was correct. You deserve a turn here. You've made it through the whole thing.
No, I'm just here soaking it all in and learning. Yeah, and wishing I had heard some of your ideas for response rates with phone and that type of interviews, because we did a phone interview for the first time with our cohort in rural South Africa, and didn't get as great response rates as we would have liked.
No, it's
during COVID.
It's definitely tough business, and I think even in Nepal we weren't sure, because of course people are very polite and willing to sort of do what they think is polite for the interviewer, which always worries me that they won't really tell us what they think. But telephone is just much easier to avoid, as is, I suppose, text or email. It's sort of easy to just take a pass, be too busy for as you like, and it can be a more passive way of refusing than saying right up, I refuse. It'll be interesting to see as we go back over and over and over again to the same respondents, how that begins to trail off. One great aspect of this design is we know a lot about these young people before they made it to this study. And so in terms of understanding the selection into into the web survey or continuation, we should be able to learn a lot about that when we link the data sets together. Which honestly, that's the main plan with the cortisol. The cortisol data collection is funded under a R01, where we're primarily testing a sort of mail out, mail back self-collection protocol. And we're going to be testing for selectivity in the self-collection protocol by using every variable ever collected in the CVFS to see, hey, are the people who don't have enough hair, Coulter, to your point, have too much product in their hair to get cortisol, or just don't respond to the protocol, how are they selective of pre-existing social determinants of stress?
It's almost 3.
Yeah, really interesting. Thanks. Nice to see you guys.
Great to see you, Elise, and don't be afraid as you're working on proposals to use any of these new data.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that the linking is already happening for the mental health of the parents and the children.
You know,
I should have assumed.
linking operation is a huge chore, no
Yeah.
doubt about that. And it all and it's interesting, right? It all comes with you can do this, but you can't do that. And so it means you've got this group of people every time. So that would apply to any way you want to use the data as well. Nevertheless, it does give you another round of interesting measures you might be able to put into your study.
Yeah. Good thing I'm working with Sabrina, who's so familiar with everything going on.
Yeah, she is part of the team on the Cortisol project.
Yeah.
Knows that, and she, as you know, has been proposing to continue the web survey for her own work. So
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, great to see you. Thank you so much for participating in this, and tell everybody to go click on the website and have a look.
Thanks.
I
Talk to you later. Bye.